Switzerland, a nation which is known for its Alps, chocolate, clocks, interesting banking arrangements and, well, neutrality. But why is Switzerland neutral? In the past it was known for its ruthless mercenaries with their ability to wage war, whereas now it's known as a nation that has maintained a neutral foreign policy for the last 100 years. Well, that's what we're going to discuss in today's video. The origins of Swiss neutrality are widely debated, but it's a miracle that Switzerland actually survived, given their neighbours, well, loved to annex things. And basically at this point in history, the Swiss aren't really a formal state, but more a loose confederation of states intertwined within the joyful mess of Holy Roman politics. In the 1500s, there would be a rather small bit of, well, a fight between King Francis I of France and the Swiss Confederation. Basically, Francis claimed to be the ruler of the throne of Milan, whereas the Swiss also claimed this throne, and thus it was time to fight. The Swiss lost and forced themselves into a perpetual peace with the Kingdom of France to avoid any more embarrassing situations. But hey, do you know who isn't from France? Savoy. And that's why the Swiss, the northern part of the country, when the French invaded the Italian peninsula only a few years later, expanding the Swiss border. After this event though, the Swiss would largely stay out of any wars apart from the occasional supply of troops and mercenaries during the 30 Years' War of 1618 to 1648. It is quite remarkable the Swiss managed to survive this long, and the reasons for peace could be narrowed down to two main reasons. One was that they were bordered by the world's, well, most powerful nations, and that after the Protestant Reformation everyone decided to believe in different things, which sort of screwed up the politics of Europe. The Swiss were promptly invaded by a funny little chap called Napoleon Bonaparte, famous for being a general or being French, or I can't quite remember, but the Swiss Confederacy was thereby abolished and the new Helvetic Republic would be put in place. Switzerland was then nicked of the territories of Graubünden and Joinville. Napoleon eventually changed his mind and decided to reform the Swiss Confederacy, though smaller and as a French puppet state. This lasted a short while before Napoleon was ousted from power and the Allies had a new cunning plan for Switzerland. The Prussians wanted it to join the German Confederation, the Austrians wanted it to become an Austrian puppet state and a buffer against the French. It was all going well until the 19th century, in which the nation became a haven for revolutionaries or social bandits, and the Swiss were forced to keep tabs on their people by the other great powers because of this. Although this was quite easy, as the Swiss had just fought a civil war and basically had made their state far more centralised. However, an interesting fact is that during the Civil War, there were neutral parties, and so some of Switzerland was neutral within their own war, which I don't know how that works, but anyway, now, so you're probably wondering how the Swiss didn't get themselves Belgians, because the first real threat to their independence came via the First World War. The French had planned to drive troops through Switzerland, but the Swiss mobilised their French border and said, no you can't. And so, well, that was that. So the threat in the First World War came from France and not Germany. Its long-standing neutrality meant that after the war it was chosen to be the headquarters of the League of Nations. World War II was the last time that Swiss neutrality was threatened, with the rest of the Europe shitting itself. Hitler proclaimed that the Swiss were a pimple on the face of Europe and should be annihilated as soon as possible. Henry Guesson, a famous Swiss commander-in-chief, would mobilise the army and get ready to defend the borders at all cost. However, the Germans would never actually invade, despite the plan nicknamed Operation Tannenbaum, or Operation Grün, which was basically an operation to invade both Liechtenstein and Switzerland. This was simply because it was too hard, and there were other reasons, of course, because Switzerland served as a useful trading hub, or for, well, trade and political diplomacy. It was a point where the Axis and Allies could meet to discuss. It also served as a banking location where the Germans could keep all the gold they, borrowed from people. And the Swiss was also a mountainous land with very little in the way of natural resources and home to people that were both fiercely independent and armed to the bloody teeth. After the war, Switzerland would suffer no further penalties or cost to its independence. It would be made one of the home of the United Nations buildings, and the Swiss didn't actually join this until 2002. And with that, it brings the conclusion of this video. I hope you enjoyed, and remember to hit the subscribe button.
J'aime l'oignon quand il est bon. J'aime l'oignon, frère, j'aime l'oignon, j'aime l'oignon. Oh pas camarade,